Hi, so thanks for joining me today, Mark. Um, Obviously, I know what you do, but could you tell the others what company you work for and what you do?
Lovely to be with you today as well, Manda. So I'm Mark Simons from Mr. and Mrs. Simons. We're a specialist letting and property management company. We're based in Northwest London and we deal with our clients' property needs.
Okay, no, that's great. Now, as I kind of mentioned, my channel is mostly sort of for first-time buyers, and I get
Yeah,
first-time buyers all the time who are like, they'd really like to, have property and rent it out, but they're just a bit scared of how it all works. Have you got
sure.
any sort of comments on that?
Yeah, I think I've been there, first time buyer. When we started out, we borrowed on our credit cards and for the deposit, and we went from there. Obviously, the metrics were a bit different back then, but the process is the same. I mean, if it makes financial sense, it's worth doing because owning your own property is a great thing to have. It's security. I would say that uh, it's important to the price you pay is the most important thing. Obviously, you want to get it the best possible price you can. If you get it at a great price, then that makes things a lot easier. So if you're in a position where you already have a mortgage in place, that's fantastic as well. Buyers like to see that they don't have anything to worry about, or if you're in a cash situation, you've got a deposit for a cash, you can show proof of funds. Buyers like to see that as well, as agents do. If you're in a chain, you're having to sell something, obviously it's a lot more problematic. So for a first-time buyer, I'd say the best thing to do is to see somebody like yourself, get an idea about how you can get a mortgage in place. So when you find that ideal property within your price, your budget, you're ready. You're more or less ready to go. You just need to get a survey done. Everything's in place, because if you don't have a mortgage in place, it can take time, and you don't know
No,
when you're going to get
absolutely.
that mortgage. And also, uh, mortgages have a finite time as well, don't they? Once you get the offer, well, that's the only thing about getting a mortgage early on. You've got a running clock. You can get it updated, but you know more about that than I do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what would you say to people that don't want to buy a residential and want to buy first as a rental property? I mean, obviously, I can talk to them from the side of how to go about it mortgage
Yeah.
wise, but I mean, what kind of services would you offer?
I would say if you're buying a property as a rental of first property, there are a few options open to you. If you're going to live in it yourself, you can rent one of the rooms. You can rent two of the rooms. That can mitigate the cost of your mortgage by half or even more. I know people who do that, and still your own property. You're in control of who lives there, and that's very useful. If you're going to do it yourself, depending on where the property is. If the property is near you, I would always advise using an agent, certainly for straight first off, just because it gives you a buffer between the tenant. And sometimes you can get a bit emotional. You're dealing with someone, they're asking for, ideally, if you have an agent, their job is to professionally mitigate issues and deal with them in a professional way. And if you've got any issues, you can tell the agent, and the agent can work out the best way of dealing with them. I mean, you've obviously got to factor in the cost of an agent. I mean, we also do pre-tenancy work. So somebody will buy a flat, it will need works, we'll project manage it for our client, and very often we'll help with in terms of the cost of that, and we'll take it from the rent over a long period of time, so they don't have to necessarily factor in uh, those upfront costs.
Okay,
But
that's good to
I would
know.
say,
But I mean, from the practical
yeah,
element of, sorry to
it's all
interrupt,
right.
from the practical element, so they've got the keys, they own the property. What happens then? Or should they be contacting you before they've even exchanged and completed?
I think when they find the property they want, I'd say make contact with an agent, let them go in there, let them advise you on whether or not it's a good rental property, and that can help. And what sort of rent they think you can get. Is it near transport, what sort of size of the rooms, what's the condition of the property, are there any issues in terms of if it's in a block of flats or it's in a converted a building, are there any noise issues? How can they be mitigated? What do I need to do to get it to a state that we can rent it? Very often now, boroughs are asking for landlord licenses. You've got to make sure that that's for any property. It's not very onerous, but you've still got to make sure that you're compliant. So I would say speak to an agent, get a feel for what is a good rental property. Are you buying for a rental return? Are you buying for equity appreciation over a long period of time? You know, what
Could you explain what those two mean?
so equity appreciation would be I'm buying a property because I think it's going to go up in value. I just want to hold it. The rent, I don't mind if it just looks after itself because I know I'm going to make money on the property, the value increasing. Maybe I'm going to sell it in a year, in 3 years, and a lot more. Whereas if I buy a property that I'm looking at maximizing my rental income, it might not be a property that would necessarily go up a lot in value. It might be in maybe a building that's not fantastic, but it's got large rooms and it's good value in terms of a rental proposition. It's not costing you a lot of money to buy, and you're getting good rental return on it. So, so quite often they're good propositions because you're getting good regular income from them in terms of the rental. There should still be some equity appreciation, but it won't be as much if you're buying something maybe in an area that is going to increase in value.
Okay,
So
that's great.
that would be the situation maybe outside London, not necessarily. There are some hotspots outside London, but a lot of properties outside London will not necessarily have huge equity increases, although London, I think, is near its ceiling. So, you're going to get more bang for your buck, as it were. So you'll be able to buy at a lot lower price. Obviously, the rental income won't be as much, but you're going to get more. You're going to get a better return for your money.
Okay, that's great. So you've said, before they even have bought the property, consult an agent, find out whether it's a good rental and all of that kind of thing. That's great. And then it is a good property. They go ahead, they buy it. What happens next from your side?
So they buy it, then we would, if there's any works that need to be done, we would then do it as soon as the keys are handed over. We'd say, let's get the works done. And depending on the condition, we could even show it while it's being done up. People like to see things going on and they can see the properties being improved. And maybe that, they might want a particular color scheme, as long as it's not too outrageous. So people like to see that because they think, oh, we're getting something new and it's all going to be fresh. So, and also you get a bit of a head start. You don't have to wait for it to be all finished. So you can take a view on it depending on how much work is needed. And then we can get all the gas certificate, the electrical certificate, the EPC will already have been done. And then once it's all complete, we'd get some photographs taken or maybe a 360 video done, and then we'd put it on the portals and we'd start marketing it.
Okay, great. And then people view it and they decide that they want to sort of take it. What happens next?
So then we do reference and credit checks on them to make sure that they can afford it firstly, and we look at what their income is, and we'll work out whether or not we think it's viable for them. We will look at if they've got any adverse credit history. Obviously, we wouldn't necessarily rule people out who have adverse credit history, but we'd want to know why. And we'd want to know, is it just an isolated incident that sometimes happens? And we'll look at the round and their personal circumstances, and then we'll take a view, and then we'll advise the landlord of what the applicants, who they are and what they want, what they're offering, and then ultimately the landlord's decision. We'll obviously recommend to them who we think are the best options, but ultimately it'll be the landlord's decision. but we're very careful on picking the right applicants, because normally we manage the property. We want to make sure that we're with law-abiding people, good communication, and that sort of indicates those two elements will help us over the journey we have with tenants. We look after our tenants, make sure they're happy, and then they stay longer, and there's less void periods for our clients, and everyone's happy. So it's like picking a partner. You
Okay.
want to be careful. You want to make sure they're the right person.
Yeah, yeah,
So
definitely, definitely. And then what would you say you do sort of month to month?
In month to month, well, we'll do inspections on the property. Sometimes when there's maintenance required, the maintenance team will go, they'll have a look, they'll report back, they'll send us photos. Sometimes we'll go and do an inspection report, we'll take photographs. And month to month, we'll send a statement to landlords showing the income, any disbursements. Obviously, if it's a major disbursement expense, we'll talk to the landlord. And it's just sort of any issues that come up. Sometimes somebody might not know how to use the boiler. It might need repressurizing, so there's not enough pressure in the system. We'll advise the tenants, and any issues they have day to day. It's like any home. It needs this day-to-day issues, but most of them are not problematic. And also it's making sure the tenants know some properties are quite old and they're not necessarily sometimes they get condensation. It might be that in the winter, the tenants like it very warm. The windows are shut and they're drying the clothes in the property. And so you get moisture build up, and that goes on the walls, and it can turn into mold and fungus. So it's important with some properties that the tenants understand how they need to ventilate the place. And also we try and mitigate that by making sure there's air vents and there's trickle vents in the windows, and if there needs to be additional ventilation, we'll recommend and take care of that. But so it's also about educating tenants on different elements of the property. I mean, sometimes it might seem very simple to some, but a lot of people don't know what a trickle vent is, which is a little vent in windows nowadays that you can open, which help the room to ventilate, to breathe, because it's healthy to have fresh air. Yeah,
And you collect the rent on a monthly basis, and
we do, and we send statements to the landlord stating what the rent is,
and pay it into their bank account. Is that how it works?
we do, and we some landlords ask for an annual statement for their tax return,
Returns, yeah.
and we do that as well. And overseas landlords, we can either deduct tax at source for them, so we take 20% off. They don't have to worry about any of their accounts, or they'd have to register with their accountant and get a FICO number, which means that we don't deduct tax at source. It goes straight to them. It's sort of just so the HMRC know that they have an accountant who's taking care of their accounts.
So would you recommend that first time landlords have an accountant?
I think if they're overseas, I think it's good, because you have obviously an allowance. If you're resident in the UK, you get an allowance of up to £10,000. So of any income. So it's worth doing that, because you won't have to pay tax on your first £10,000 of rental income. Depends what the income is, but I think yeah, I mean, yes, it would depend on what their income is profit wise, and if it's over a certain amount, yeah, an accountant's a good idea. Rather than, it doesn't cost a lot to do a return. You know, it's not expensive to get an accountant to do a return for the
And
property.
obviously you've mentioned tax as a cost. Are there any sort of other costs that you'd be aware of? I mean, how does it
Yeah.
work with council tax, for instance?
I think one of the things, I think when people talk about what's the return on a property, so they'll say, oh, it's a 5% return or it's a 10% return. What they don't factor in is all the costs. They're just, so you don't know what the maintenance costs are going to be. So I would say that on average, you're going to spend money each year on maintaining the property. It might be a problem with the washing machine. It might be a problem with the boiler. It might be various things. You can get insurance. You can get companies that do like Domestic in General that will cover your white goods, your boiler, and that's actually very competitive. I'd say Domestic in General are very competitive. It's not a lot. They'll send someone out reasonably quickly, and you'll cover for your white goods. But I would say that you've got to factor in that you're going to spend some money each year. So maybe, let's say, depending on the condition of the property, but it could be anywhere from £500 to £1,000 a year on maintenance. I mean, it varies, but you've got to factor that in to your, landlords sometimes don't realize it. Unfortunately, things happen, and being a landlord, you're going to have to look after the property. That's important as well, because if you maintain the property well, it's going to cost you less in the long term. If you leave things and let them get out of control, then it's going to cost you more because the damage is going to be more. So whenever there's a problem, you need to deal with it. Get a professional to go in there and deal with it. The most difficult thing about management is knowing what you're looking at. And if you're not in property and you don't understand when there's a problem, what the problem is, it's sometimes difficult to know who to get to fix the problem and whether they're good at fixing the problem and whether what they're telling you is correct, which is why it's good to get an experienced managing agent who knows what they're looking at and can make sure the contractor does the job as they should. And he's obviously going to sign off on that job. So there's comeback. So that's the most important thing about using a good property manager is that you don't have to worry about the maintenance side, and you can rest assured that everything is looked after.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. And something else I was thinking of while you were talking, just so they understand, there's loads of obviously different ways of charging rent. So you can have
Yeah.
rent that includes utilities, so includes gas
Yeah.
and electric, and then sometimes you can,
I,
have the rent and then pay utilities separately. Council tax is also on the onus of the tenant. Is there any other examples you can
I,
think
I
of?
think I think that sometimes landlords include the rent, maybe because they've got one gas meter for two properties and it's complicated using a sub meter and everything else is too complicated. But I'd advise against doing that, because if there's a problem ever with your rent and they stop paying the utility bills, it's going to cost you the utility bills are in your name as a landlord. So I wouldn't. I think that's not good practice. I would always, if you've got to spend a bit of money, get separate supply for the property. I think that's much better than doing it inclusive. Obviously, if you're like in a room, you're sort of a little studio within a house, or like a HMO situation, that's a bit different. I mean, and that's par for the course.
Could you explain what a HMO is?
A house of multiple occupancy. So there might be a house with 5 rooms, and those rooms might have their own en suites, or there might be one bathroom per 2 rooms, or there might be there'll be a communal kitchen and lounge, and sort of it's sort of like a house share, except you might not necessarily know everyone in there, and there you're paying a monthly amount normally, and it includes all your bills. And yeah, normally it's obviously you don't, it's cheaper than getting a whole property.
Is it a lot of work for you when you're managing a HMO as opposed to just one
Actually,
family?
we we I think an HMO is a lot more, because obviously there's more moving parts. People maybe are more likely to move on, not stay as long. But if they're happy there and they're looked after and the property's in good condition, they're likely to stay longer. But yes, there is more work there.
But then you can get more rent, can't you?
Uh, you get a bit more. Yeah, people have been charging a lot more these days for HMOs. So, it's gone up as much as I think rental property prices gone up. So have HMO property prices have gone up. Yeah, and there's maybe a lot of unscrupulous HMOs as well. I know a lot of councils are trying to crack down on that, but obviously people in difficult situations who where the properties are not maybe as compliant as they should be. But there are a lot of good HMOs as well. I mean, some really, really high-end HMOs as well these days, you know, in town.
Okay, no, that's great. I mean, I think you've covered everything, Mark. I really, really appreciate it.
That's
Um,
all right. But I must also, I must say that Manda is a fantastic person to go to, especially if you want you're looking to get a mortgage in the near-term future. Amanda will tell you what you need to get in place for before you get that mortgage, because you know nowadays mortgage companies are very particular with their criteria. So going to someone like Amanda for your mortgage is really good, because then you don't have to worry about it. So yeah, I definitely recommend Amanda as well.
oh, thank you, Mark. I appreciate
All
that.
right.
Well, thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
All
Lovely.
right. Bye-bye.
Bye.